Check, check. What is up, humans? I am Rep Kenny, and today I'm going to be going over how I made my template, some of the kind of ethos behind making a template, the do's and don'ts, and what you should be thinking about if you want to make your own, as well as showing you how to set up a automatic sidechain in your template, and then just run through kind of how and why I did all of the stuff that I did to make it. So let's get right into it. So you'll see here, basically the overall structure is a well color-coded structure that breaks out each instrument group, how it is broken out in my head, right? The biggest and most important thing about making a template for yourself is making sure that the groups of instruments all make sense for how you conceptualize the music, right? So when I was making this template, I basically took and loaded up 3 of my favorite sounds for basically each group, as well as went through and added drum racks with my 16 favorite kicks, my 16 favorite snares, and 16 favorite hi-hats, and 16 favorite toms as well. So basically I've just loaded 16 of my favorite drums in each of these categories, as well as 3 of my favorite sounds for each instrument group, right? So in the basses, you have 3 different types of basses: a reese, a wub, and another thick one. Basically, these are 3 different types of sounds that you could use to start your project in any way or start a drop, as well as a 128 of the Get Dead bass pack, bunch of really cool sounds in there, as well as a 128 of the pulsar shots. These are all more kind of analog, warm sounding stuff that you can use. And so yeah, you got a bunch of stuff loaded up already to just basically hop in and start making music, and it makes it super simple to basically just get in there and start making stuff, get your ideas in there. I'll run through some of the other stuff I included in here. It's a nice lead, clean, thicker lead, and then it's a bit more thoughtful, as well as harmonies. So yeah, basically just included some of my favorites in all of these groups, like I mentioned. Those are both such vibes. You can use those to basically set the mood for any song, as well as this pad that I've included in here. This is probably one of my favorite sounds from the entire pack. This is just me holding one note. It's just like, it's like a story in one note. It's crazy. So those are the kinds of things that you like to include in your template, stuff that's going to inspire you, stuff that's going to make it super simple for you to get in there and make something that you like. But again, if you want to make your own template, I'll just run quickly through the philosophy of what you want to set up. Basically, you need a place for every instrument to go. And it should make sense for your own organization in your head, right? So I have everything broken out: leads, harmonies, plucks, pads. Those are all kind of melodic elements. Some people might go like synths, and you could put all of those in there, right? But for me, I like things broken down a little bit more, so that's how my template looks. But for you, just make sure that it makes sense for how you conceptualize the music in your head. There should be a place for everything as you conceptualize it, as well as a well-ordered, color-coded structure. So that's thing 1. Organized by color, have a place for everything to go as soon as you add it into the project. Thing number 2, get some of the basic like engineering type stuff in there. So your sidechain triggers, you're gonna have to put those in there anyways. You might as well just put them in your template. I have a bus for all the return channels because I like to have those sidechained as well, potentially, in my projects. So those are really the two biggest things, as well. You know, having a place for references as well. It's always a nice, easy one. But the two biggest things are setting up all the basic engineering stuff and having your color coded organization for your template. Adding the sounds, you could go either way. I like to add them because for this type of template where it's intended to be a spark, you want stuff that's going to spark that creativity, right? You know, some people prefer not to have any sounds in the template, and I certainly work that way a lot. But for this template, I wanted to make this very inspirational, very productive for everyone to just jump in and get that hyperdrive song machine going full tilt. So yeah, that's why I've included some sounds in this one. But okay, so let's jump into how to set up your sidechain trigger automatically. This is something that's gonna save you a ton of time and also just make it easier to work on music. Yeah, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't do, but it helps immensely. So the biggest thing is you want to sidechain your kick and your snare in most bass music. And so to do that automatically, basically I'm going to label this kick channel kick main sidechain routed, and this one's snare main sidechain routed. So I know that this is where the MIDI trigger is coming from. Then I've already got our triggers up here, so I'm just gonna then take the MIDI from kick main sidechain routed, have it in, so it's taking MIDI in, and then same with the snare main sidechain routed, and then hit the in. So now when I put a kick pattern in here, let's copy something out like this, and I put, actually let's shorten that a little bit, and I put a snare in here. Snare is going to be on the 3. Now this is going to automatically trigger the sidechain trigger, right? And so now we've set up our trigger to act automatically after it receives MIDI input from these two channels. But the next step is that we need to set up our sidechain on all of the groups to route automatically, right? So basically what that's going to look like is putting a compressor on all of your individual groups and setting up the sidechain, right? So let's grab a compressor for, we'll start with the sub. So we're gonna have one for the kick, and I like to work with basically the highest ratio and the lowest threshold possible, so that when that trigger hits, it's completely off. And the reason I use this operator playing white noise is because I can basically set the length of the impulse specifically to the drum that I'm using, and same with the snare. It just makes it so you can get a really precise control and a really tight release on that sidechain. So let's go back to the sub here. So now we're taking the input from the kick sidechain trigger, and the threshold's all the way down, so we don't have to have this release very long. And then I'm gonna set the same one for the snare and just make this a little bit shorter, maybe even shorter. Okay, so now that we have that set up for the sub, let's do the same thing for the bass. Throw it on there, And then down here for everything leads and below, I'm actually going to group all this and just make this a sidechain, or what would we call this? Synths, maybe, I guess, because it's all just getting sidechain. So yeah, we'll call it that. That's fine. The leads and harmonies, plucks, pads, white noise, ambient, and effects, they all need to be sidechain, but they don't need to be sidechain quite as heavily as the sub and the bass. So we can actually pull this threshold up a little bit. And I'm setting these to about where I know sounds good based on me having done this a bunch of times. But like, listen and play with these settings for yourself when you are making your own template and your own songs. And then, since the synths don't have to be sidechained quite as hard as the sub and the bass, because they're playing higher up in the frequency spectrum, they're already less in the way of the kick and the snare that we're trying to get to punch through. We can actually shorten up these release times a little bit as well. So then the last thing that I'm going to do is set this up on the hi-hats. Now this one is optional. I like my hi-hats to be sidechained a little bit. Doesn't need to be quite as strong. And then also I'm going to throw this on the vocals and make this even less strong. So basically my philosophy with sidechain is to sidechain everything at least a little bit. The sub and the bass you have to sidechain a lot. The leads still a lot, but not quite as much. And then vocals, hi-hats a little bit, but just so that they get out of the way and you can't really hear the sidechain there. So now that we have our sidechain automatically set up, now it's super easy to just start making music, and you don't have to worry about any of the engineering work that goes into setting up a sidechain. You don't have to worry about, is it going to sound different than when I started after I add the sidechain. I know that used to trip me up a little bit. If I made a loop and I liked the way it sounded, then I added a sidechain, it would always be like, it doesn't sound as good as it did before. And then you kind of make a sacrifice with your sidechain, and you really just don't want to do that. You want your sidechain to be very pronounced so that your kick and snare cut through as hard as possible, and then have everything else pull back right away so that you get the maximum punch of the kick and snare, but also you don't take away a whole bunch of that other melodic content that you want to shine through. So yeah, setting it up beforehand solves all that. So basically, yeah, now that you have that set up, you just throw a kick and snare in and it automatically routes the sidechain. I'll show you guys, for instance, if we made a Reese here. So you can tell that it's like nearly imperceptible. But if we didn't have this, you can tell that the kick just doesn't cut and the snare just doesn't cut quite as hard. And there you have it. That is setting up your sidechain automatically in this template, as well as some do's and don'ts for creating your own template, and kind of my philosophy on how to build it. So yeah, that's it for the template video. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys, setting some stuff up automatically and getting a good idea of how to approach this stuff. So we'll see you around.